I want to welcome everyone here this morning at Friendly House and also our large crowd on Zoom this morning. We've got humanism is a philosophy informed by science, inspired by art, and motivated by compassion. Humanists, like those gathered here today, attempt to live the best life they can envision because this is the only life of which they are certain. Humanism affirms the dignity and worth of all people. We do this not only for all that humans have accomplished in the arts and science and humanities, but also simply for the possibility for peace and well-being when people are respected for their human potential. Humanists strive to lead fulfilling, meaningful, and ethical lives using reason and empathy to guide their decisions and their actions. Portland, we are a chapter of the American Humanist Association, and the American Humanist Association has developed the 10 Commitments, which is really a gentle guide to the behaviors of humanism. And our topic this morning, understanding the 2023 Hamas-Israeli War, addresses the humanist commitments of global awareness and empathy. Our reader this morning is Ann Henderson. Ann, can you come in, please? Oh, she's already there. Hello, Ann. Thank you for doing this.
Okay. I'm going to read, well, we'll go this way.
Okay.
In 1971, John Denver wrote a poem and sang a song that began like this. Last night I had the strangest dream I never dreamed before. I dreamed the world had all agreed to put an end to war. So it's the peace poem. There's a name for killing, for war and killing. There's a name for giving in. When you know another answer, for me, the name is sin. But there's still time to turn around and make all hatred cease and give another name to living, and we could call it peace. And peace would be the road we walk each step along the way, and peace would be the way we work, and peace the way we play. And peace would be the way, hold on.
Mhm.
And in all we see that's different, and in all the things we know, peace would be the way we look, and peace the way we grow. There's a name for separation. There's a name for first and last, when it's all for us or nothing. For me, the name is past. But there's still time to turn around and make all hatred cease and give a name to all the future, and we could call it peace. And if peace is what we pray for and peace is what we give, then peace will be the way we are and peace the way we live. Yes, there still is time to turn around and make all hatred cease and give another name to living, and we could call it peace. I know it's a little too soon now for the Israeli Hamas war, but it's a dream.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you very much. All right. Well, today's a pretty serious meeting, and I really am very happy that we have a nice group here at Friendly House and also have so many people attending through our Zoom portal. I'd like to introduce Professor Joel Beinin. He taught at Stanford University from 1983 until he retired in 2019. In 2002, he served as president of the Middle East Studies Association of North America and served as director of Middle East Studies and professor of history at the American University in Cairo from 2006 to 2008. Currently, he is the Donald J. McLaughlin Professor of History and Professor of Middle East History, Emeritus at Stanford University. Joel and his wife lived in Israel from 1970 to 1973. His parents, his brother, and sister immigrated to Israel in 1973. His brother's older daughter, Leant, and her husband, Aviv, were members of the Nir Oz kibbutz when it was attacked on October 7th by Hamas. They were taken hostage. This morning, he will be presenting Understanding the 2023 Hamas-Israeli War. Thank you so much for being here today.
And thank you, everyone, for your presence and attention. So as you've been told, my niece and her husband are hostages, and I've always been very closely connected to Israel through my family, but the connection is a little different and more intense under the current circumstances. It's always good to begin with a map because it's a very small area, Israel-Palestine, and the Gaza Strip is an even smaller area, which is about 7.5 miles wide at its longest and 25 miles in its length. And even before October 7th, what you can see from this map is that Israel had constructed a security barrier and a buffer zone that had effectively made it impossible for Palestinians to work and even walk near the border. And Israel is now in complete control of the north of the Gaza Strip. So if you could cut it right about here, and most of the population of the northern Gaza Strip has now been pushed to the south. This is what happened on October 7th in the operation that Hamas called Al-Aqsa Flood. Hamas attacked 20 rural communities, 3 towns, 8 army bases, killed about 1,200 people, among them 368 soldiers, as reported by the Israeli military. 5,400 were wounded, approximately 240 were taken hostages. And according to a report verified by the New York Times, many of the victims were tortured physically, abused, raped, burned alive, and dismembered. So it was extraordinarily brutal and vicious. What explains from the Hamas side this kind of massive atrocity? So Hamas and even Palestinians who don't support Hamas would cite the ongoing Nakba, that's the Arabic word which means catastrophe, that Palestinians call the 1948 war, which resulted in 750,000 Palestinians either being forced out of the country or fleeing in fear. So that literally the state of Israel was established on the ruins of Palestinian society before 1948. 1/3 of the population between the river and the sea was Jewish and 2/3 Palestinian. In the 78% of the territory that became the state of Israel after the 1948 war, there were only about 150,000 Palestinians left. In the War of 1967, Israel completed the occupation of the rest of the territory from the river to the sea, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, the Gaza Strip, also the Sinai Peninsula, which has since been returned to Egypt in a peace treaty, and the Golan Heights, which annexed and which was Syrian territory in 1981. In 2006, there were legislative elections for the Palestinian Authority. I'll speak a bit about that in more detail later. Hamas won, and Israel, the United States, and the European Union did not accept the results of what by all accounts was an exceptionally democratic election, and Israel has imposed a siege on the Gaza Strip since 2007. Since then, even before, popular, meaning unarmed and nonviolent resistance, has been met with extreme violence and demonization by Israel. Since 2021, Israeli Orthodox Zionist Messianists have been increasingly conducting incursions onto the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, which is also the Temple Mount in the Jewish tradition. And there has been an intensified forced dispossession, which some would call slow motion ethnic cleansing, in the West Bank. In the last several years in particular, 3,000 Palestinians have been forcibly displaced from their homes and lands since 2020. There were, during the first half of the current year, 570 settler attacks on Palestinians. In the same period, 50 Palestinian attacks on Israelis, in the course of which 140 Palestinians and 30 Israelis had been killed in the West Bank before October 7th. Since October 7th, that number has skyrocketed. So from the Hamas point of view, the point of this attack was to reestablish Palestinian initiative and agency, to break the stalemate. Palestine had not been considered an important political question. Israel was making peace with various Arab countries who had not, in fact, been at war with Israel, and ignoring the Palestinian question. And in particular, there was much talk about normalization of relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel, which, had it happened, would have represented all but the liquidation of the question of Palestine among Arab countries. I personally didn't think that was nearly as close to happening as many people did, but it was certainly something that was talked about a great deal. So here are just an array of pictures, I won't explicate every one, that show you some of the aggressive acts of the Messianic settler right wing in and around Jerusalem in particular. So top left are some of these settlers praying on the Temple Mount, which is a violation of the status quo that was established after the 1967 war, according to which Muslims can pray on the Temple Mount, and or Al-Aqsa, Al-Haram al-Sharif, as they would call it. Jews can visit the Temple Mount. So clearly they are here doing much more than visiting, and especially in the top right, where the Israeli border police, with their shoes on, which is a desecration, have actually invaded the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Middle right, you see the destruction of a Palestinian home in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. Below that, a home of the Palestinian poet Muhammad al-Kurd, which was invaded by settlers in 2009, and they've taken over literally half of the home. All of these things could be the subject of a lecture in and of themselves, so I won't get very detailed about it, but feel free to ask. And then bottom left is not in Jerusalem, it's in the South Hebron Hills, where the Israeli army decades ago declared a firing zone, meaning that all the Palestinians had to evacuate. They appealed to the Supreme Court. They were allowed to come back, but in fact, all sorts of restrictions were placed on them. Settlers were allowed to live in the area, even though officially no one was allowed to live there. And then a year and a half ago, the Supreme Court authorized their evacuation. So another 1,000 or so Palestinians are threatened with being evicted from their homes. Some already have been, the others may at any moment. So those are the sorts of conditions that Hamas was reacting to. And then here's another one, the Great March of Return, which was conceived as a popular, meaning unarmed. So we have to popular, unarmed, but maybe they'll throw stones, maybe they'll send an incendiary balloon, armed. So 3 different categories in Palestinian parlance for describing resistance. So every Friday for this whole period from March of 2018 until December of 2019, people gathered these protest camps, and Israel set up snipers that mostly shot at people's legs and disabled them, but 128 people, mostly unarmed demonstrators, were killed as well. So here's an example from the Palestinian point of view of popular unarmed resistance, although not strictly nonviolent to be sure, and Israel's response to it convinced some people that they only understand violence. How do Israelis understand what has been going on here? So all of the time that Benjamin Netanyahu has been in power, and he has been in power since 2009 with only a brief interruption, his view has been to effectively support Hamas, to make Hamas Israel's ally, because that creates a split between the Gaza Strip, which has been ruled by Hamas since 2006, Bank, which has been ruled by Fatah, the main part. I don't know what happened here. That came about because Israel and the United States encouraged Fatah to carry out a coup d'etat in 2007, overturn the democratic election by Hamas in 2006. So I won't go through all of these quotes just to see that this is not a secret. I haven't told you something that you couldn't have known on your own, especially if you read Hebrew. But even that was not even necessary. This was widely known in Israel that it was Netanyahu's strategy to support Hamas against the Palestinian Authority. Now, that said, the concept, as that way of doing things was known, was understood to be able to manage the conflict. Why manage the conflict? Because Netanyahu had no intention whatsoever to resolve the conflict by negotiations with any Palestinian party, because the Palestinians would have demanded something that looked like a state, and Netanyahu and his allies in the government were not prepared for that. So with the actual attack of October 7th, which again, its horribleness should not be in any way minimized, Israelis, and then supported by President Biden, made these truly absurd proclamations. Hamas is ISIS, that is the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. We're fighting Nazis. The Hamas are the new Nazis. The violence of Hamas was barbarism as consequential as the Holocaust. I mean, this is all beyond nonsensical. I mean, you can express your horror at the mass murder of civilians, taking hostages, babies, rapes, beheading children. I mean, it's horrible. But no, this is not an explanation. Hamas is a Palestinian Islamist organization. They are not an international terrorist organization. They have never attacked an American anywhere in the world except if they happen to live in Israel or any other person of any other nationality. Their enemy is Israel, which makes them a problem, to be sure, but not Nazis and not worse than ISIS and not barbarism sequential than the Nazis. From the Israeli point of view, Israeli political leaders, military leaders have said, have framed this in genocidal language. So in one of Netanyahu's public speeches, and at this point he's actually said it again, he said, "Remember what Amalek has done to you." So if you know your Bible, and I've given you the verses there where that sentence appears, the Israelites are commanded to kill every woman, child, man, goat, camel, donkey, everything of the Amalekites, because they attacked the Israelites as they were wandering in the desert between Egypt and the land of Canaan. And King Saul was not allowed to establish a dynasty. His son was not allowed to become king after him, because when he made war on the Amalekites, he allowed the Amalekite king to live. So especially Jews who know their Bible know this is a call for total genocide. And all the other quotes that I've got here, I was a little bit annoyed that I had to comb through the Israeli press to find them. And then on November 15th, Mark Landler in the New York Times had collected most of them as well, in addition to having found 18,000 genocidal statements on X, formerly Twitter, including 286 statements by prominent Israelis that potentially incited to unlawful behavior. So that's the tenor of what's going on in Israel. Hamas, again, is an Islamist, jihadist, nationalist organization. They believe that there is no solution to the Palestine question except by jihad. Their 1988 charter is openly anti-Semitic, proclaiming that Israel, by virtue of its being Jewish and of having a Jewish population, defies Islam. That's an interpretation of Islam that most Muslims would not accept. Even after they moderated to some degree their political perspective with a political statement in 2017, they continued to argue that resistance and jihad for the liberation of Palestine will remain a legitimate right, a duty for our people. So again, this is harsh. I don't think it's Nazism. So in response to the horrific October 7th attack of Hamas, Israel launched Operation Iron Swords. These numbers are surely underestimates, but as of the latest figures I was able to collect, Israel has now killed 14,800 Palestinians, among whom are 6,150 children. That's 41% or thereabouts, plus 3,550 women. There's an article in the New York Times today. I recommend it highly because what it shows is, first, this is the highest proportion of women and children that Israel has killed in any of its assaults on the Gaza Strip since 2008. It's a higher proportion of women and children killed than the United States and its allies did in the reconquest of Mosul from ISIS. It's a higher proportion of women and children killed than the United States did in 2003, the first year that it had invaded Iraq. And it's a higher proportion of women and children killed than the United States did in its entire 20 years of war in Afghanistan. And the article goes on to explain in technical terms that I'm not able to really get my head wrapped around about if you use bombs that are 2,000 pounds, or if you use bombs of 500 pounds and you kill more civilians, and that the United States tried to use smaller bombs, Israel is actually using bigger bombs, and so on. So there is, if not actual intentionality of targeting civilians, the inevitable certainty of killing large numbers of civilians because of the tactics that Israel is using. Does this constitute genocide? The definition of genocide, which is contained in Article 2 of the International Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, which was articulated by a Polish Jewish jurist, Raphael Lemkin, is here in front of you. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to make the determination. Omer Bartov, who is one of the most respected and eminent historians of the Holocaust, wrote in an op-ed in the New York Times, functionally and rhetorically, we may be watching an ethnic cleansing operation that could quickly devolve into genocide. And that was 2 weeks ago, and I don't know when the balance shifts, but that's his judgment, a cautious one to be sure. Now, where did all this come from? So many people have argued that if you even talk about the context for what Hamas, let's go there yet, for what Hamas did, you're justifying terrorism. So I'd like to insist, if that wasn't obvious already, that there's a difference between explanation and justification. So in September 2005, the Israeli government of Prime Minister Ariel Sharon decided on a unilateral Israeli disengagement from Gaza and from 4 settlements in the northern West Bank. We won't talk about the 4 settlements. There were at the time about 9,000 Israeli settlers in the Gaza Strip and also in the northern Sinai Peninsula, and a little fewer, something over 20 settlements in the area. Why did Israel decide to do this? This was made very clear by Dov Weinglass, who was the principal political advisor of Sharon. He said, the significance of the disengagement plan is the freezing of the peace process. When you freeze that process, you prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state, and you prevent a discussion of the refugees, the borders, and Jerusalem. Disengagement supplies the amount of formaldehyde that is necessary so there will not be a political process with the Palestinians. In other words, Israel didn't withdraw from the Gaza Strip and withdraw its settlers and settlements from the Gaza Strip in preparation for a peace deal with the Palestinians. It was done in order to prevent a peace deal with the Palestinians. In other words, this was part of the strategy of separating the Gaza Strip from the West Bank and freezing any kind of political process. The photos that you see here are the settlers who are fighting the army as it is trying to dislodge them. They made a very big scene about how horrific this was. They were being ripped out of their homes. They had in their homes in 2005 perhaps 15 years, maybe 20 years. The idea that Palestinians were ripped out of their homes in 1948, that they had inhabited for hundreds of years, of course, is not a fact in Israeli public culture. So here is the result of the second election for the Palestinian Legislative Council. The Legislative Council was set up as a result of the Oslo process. It was observed by observers from the Carter Center, the European Union, all sorts of international bodies. Everyone said this was perhaps the most democratic election held in the Arab world since World War II. Hamas thought it would win the election and engineered the electoral procedures to help, Fatah, the main party of the Palestinian Authority, thought it would win the election and engineered the procedures to help that along, but they were surprised. Hamas won 45% of the popular vote, but again, because of the gerrymandering and other arrangements, they ended up winning a majority of the seats. We're very familiar with that process since presidents have been commonly elected in the United States without winning the popular vote in recent years. But there it was a democratic thing. Nonetheless, President George W. Bush, whose administration was engaged in democracy promotion, rejected this along with Israel, especially after the election. Hamas and Fatah agreed to form a unity government, and the United States encouraged Fatah to carry out a coup, an attempted coup that was preempted before it could happen, as Vanity Fair reported. Why Vanity Fair has the best report on this question, I don't know, but it is a very well researched and reported article, which you can find for free on the internet if you like. The result was Hamas came to control the Gaza Strip, and Fatah and the Palestinian Authority came to control the West Bank. That's the situation that prevailed as of October 7th. And it's this situation in which Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, when he came to power in 2009, after briefly whispering that he might be prepared for a two-state solution, but quickly pulled back from that, developed this strategy of managing the conflict, which was an extension of what had been done by the Sharon government in 2005. Sharon fell into a coma. He was very obese and had a stroke, and ultimately he was succeeded first by Ehud Olmert, but then Olmert was corrupt and didn't last very long, and then by Benjamin Netanyahu. So Israel put a siege on the Gaza Strip after this failed coup d'etat in which Hamas came to sole power in the Gaza Strip. And Dov Weissglass, now working as advisor of Sharon's successor, Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, said the idea is to put the Palestinians on a diet, not to make them die of hunger. And they actually did a research and published for internal Israeli governmental purposes a paper counting the calories and figure this many trucks will this many calories per person, and just above the World Health Organization's minimal calories. And then there was the strategy of mowing the lawn, in which on the various occasions that I've put on the slide there, Israel assaulted the Gaza Strip. The most substantial assault before the current one was in 2014, when more than 2,000 Palestinians were killed. So everybody thought that was quite horrific. We're above that at this point. This situation is what Tarek Bakoni, author of a very good book about Hamas Contained, called Violent Equilibrium. Tarek Bakoni has been all over the web with webinars and lectures and so on. He's one of the people who knows the most about Hamas. This book is, the argument of this book is obviously wrong. Hamas was not contained. That was the surprise of October 7th. And I'd say I dissent somewhat from his lack of willingness to be full-throated in his condemnation of what Hamas did, although he does condemn it. But again, not as full-throated as I would like. So these are the death tolls that go back to the siege period, and the orange ones are the Palestinians and the purple ones are the Israelis. And you can see that until October 7th, 2023, there's simply no comparison between the two. In 2017, the UN Conference on Trade and Development declared that because of the siege that Israel had imposed, Gaza would become uninhabitable in 2020. Nonetheless, there are about 2.2 million people there living there as of 2023 in conditions that are even worse than the 2019 conditions in this infographic here. We won't go through all of it, but on any social indicator you can choose, Gaza was a humanitarian disaster before October 7th. I'll end here with lessons. People often want to know what lessons you can learn from history, and my usual answer to that is you can't learn any. But we can learn something about Israel's objective in the war. Its declared objective is to destroy Hamas and make sure that Hamas will no longer be a factor in the politics and social life of the Gaza Strip. Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982 with that same objective regarding the PLO. The PLO had many social, military bases in southern Lebanon, a headquarters in Beirut. Israel went all the way to Beirut. Israel did, in fact, expel the PLO from Beirut, and they went into exile in Tunis. And what happened? Was Palestinian nationalism destroyed? No, it was not. And perhaps even more importantly, from Israel's security perspective, Hezbollah came into existence in response to Israel's invasion of Lebanon in 1982. Hezbollah did not exist before 1982. It was formed by militia people who were trained by Iran because southern Lebanon is Shia, and there has been hundreds of years of connection between that community of Shia in South Lebanon and Iran. So it's not very likely that Israel will actually achieve its declared objective in the Gaza Strip, no matter how long this goes on. Thank you very much for your attention.
Joe, thank you so much for this really balanced and informative presentation. All right, I think we're ready for our first question. Roy, go ahead.
Yeah, my wife and son are Jewish. My son's was heavily involved in Israel with birthright and that kind of stuff. My question is, what's the difference between Hamas and the Fatah? And if I could have a second part, isn't there a huge split between the secular Jews and the Orthodox Jews why they have an exemption? They don't have to be in the army, but they can cause all the trouble while the seculars have to do the fighting.
So Fatah was historically the largest of the organizations of the Palestine Liberation Organization. It was secular, but as was the case in the same period for secular Zionist parties, they often deployed religious symbolism for their nationalist cause. Fatah is the party that led the negotiation of the Oslo Accords, that formed the Palestine Authority that was established after the Oslo Accords, and which had the majority in the Palestine Legislative Council the first time that elections were held. Hamas was never part of the PLO. They are part of the broader Sunni Islamist movement in the Arab and Muslim world that became popular in the 1970s. They are historically linked to the Egyptian Muslim Brothers. They only formed as Hamas with the promulgation of their charter in August of 1988. And their view is that all of Palestine, from the river to the sea, should be an Islamic state, and that objective can only be achieved by jihad. On the Israeli side, the largest plurality of the country are either secular, meaning they don't believe in any God at all, wouldn't go into a synagogue except for perhaps a wedding or a bar mitzvah. My family wouldn't even do that. My last wedding I went to in my family, there was a wedding, not in a synagogue, but then they had to go to Cyprus to actually get married. And the other component in that group are people who are traditional, which means they may or observe Shabbat in some form or another. They won't eat milk and meat at the same meal. They won't eat pork. They will have a wedding or a bar mitzvah in a synagogue and so on. About 10-15% of the population are Haredim or ultra-Orthodox. They are the ones who are largely exempt from the army. Ideologically, they're not Zionists, but they are an important component of the settlement project because they're very poor because they also don't work very much. The men are largely spending their time studying Torah. So they live in overcrowded housing conditions and can't afford to move to other places in pre-1967 Israel. So part of the state's settlement project was to open settlements for them. So the largest single settlement in the West Bank is populated by Haredim, ultra-Orthodox, who didn't go there because they believe in the messianic version of the settlement project, but because they needed a place to live. Then there's another 10-15% who are the messianic religious right, people represented by Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich in the current government. These people believe that Judaizing the entire land from the river to the sea will bring about the coming of the Messiah, and whatever problems are entailed are not problems, because when the Messiah comes, he's going to solve all the problems. So try to argue with that. Well, they don't believe in that, actually. So
Okay, thank you so much. We have a comment from Ringa. Ringa, I'm going to ask you to make a short comment, and we're having questions. So think about
Okay.
what you're going to say and
Yeah.
keep it
Yeah.
limited.
Thank you very much for a very clear, unbiased, short report of this conflict. And my concern is I hope that if we had unbiased reporting by the media as of today, then there will be a better understanding. Just to give an example, it was mentioned the recent second hostage removal. Most of the people released by Israel were women and children, but that has not been mentioned by any of the major journals like Washington Post or New York Times, and it's been reported by many others. So we need to have a proper reporting of this thing, which gives the information on both sides, not just give more detailed information for one side, not for the other, or even the full facts. Then
Let me say that, one, I'm not unbiased. I don't believe that there is such a thing as objectivity or an unbiased account. I began by telling you that my niece and her husband are hostages. How could I possibly be unbiased in a situation like that? I have a point of view, and I'll tell you exactly what it is if it wasn't clear enough. I didn't make a point of it, actually. I think that there are two national communities that live in the land between the river and the sea, and that they are neither of them going anywhere, and that there is no choice but that they find a way to live together on the basis of full, equal political and civil rights for both communities, full national rights for both communities, and full democratic rights for all the individuals. So that's a point of view, and that's my point of view. It is not the point of view of the Israeli government. It is not the point of view of Hamas, certainly. It is not the point of view of Fatah. It is not the point of view of the Biden administration. But that is a real point of view out there. I did an interview with the local Fox channel a few days ago with my friend Nael Sacher, who lost 39 members of his family in the Gaza Strip, which is how Channel 12 found us, two local Portlanders who are engaged here. And we agree on exactly what I just said. So that is a camp out there. So the real problem is not why didn't you hear about all the facts that I gave you? You could have found out all of them if you had been willing to spend the time. There was nothing here that I told you that wasn't totally public information. But what you didn't perhaps hear about is the existence of this camp of Palestinians and Israelis and American Jews who believe in coexistence on the terms that I just articulated.
Thank you, Joe. We have question or two here at Friendly House. Go ahead, Dave.
Apparently, the dominant drive or motivation on both sides of this, ever since Israel was created, is mutual hatred and resentment. And you said a little while ago that in Israel there is a small minority who believe in exterminating the Palestinians, and I keep thinking of Hitler's term, the final solution. And I was thinking it may be naive of me, but I keep thinking that the Jews, who have been generally horribly treated throughout history, why can't they have a more humanistic approach and treat the Palestinians like people who count? You just said that there is a movement in Israel to do that. Equal rights and equal treatment of the other side. Is there any hope that that movement may become the dominant way of thinking in Israel? What's your feeling about that?
So you asked a complex of questions. So first, Israeli Jews and many Jews around the world are a traumatized people, not only because their are many Jewish families with relatives, ancestors who perished in the Nazi mass murder of Jews, but also because both in Israel and the United States, educational institutions train people to amplify that trauma, so that that trauma is an essential part of Israeli identity. And that's not going away anytime soon. It's also an essential part of the identity of many American Jews, even those like myself, who have a different point of view than, say, the majority of the official institutions of the Jewish community. It's present. People who are traumatized very commonly act against other people and traumatize them. So that's children of alcoholics become alcoholics, children who are abused by their parents often abuse their children. So that's a psychological complex that we're familiar with. And Israel is certainly not exempt from it. So we won't be seeing anytime soon that will go away. It's too soon to tell what the long-term impact of October 7th and the aftermath will be in Israeli politics. What there was is not what will be. The day after the war, Netanyahu's political career is over. He may remain in office for some time after that because of the constitutional structure of the Israeli politics. It's a parliamentary system. He has to be voted out in a vote of no confidence. Most of his coalition partners will not vote against him because they stand to lose their seats in an early election. But he's done politically. That's clear. The most likely people to replace him are people who were marching in the streets for 9 months every Saturday evening before October 7th, demanding that Netanyahu's coalition not weaken the independence of the judiciary and maintain democracy. What did they mean by democracy? It meant democracy for Jews because raising the slogan, which a small minority, 2,000 out of 100,000 in a demonstration in Tel Aviv typically, raising the slogan, no democracy with occupation, was not on their agenda. Even less was on their agenda the fact that Palestinian citizens, who comprise 21% of all the citizens of Israel, do not have equal rights. In 2018, Israel passed a basic law. It doesn't have a constitution, so that's the substitute for a constitution, proclaiming that Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people and only of the Jewish people, and only Jews have the right to exercise self-determination from the river to the sea. So the pro-democracy movement was not prepared to discuss those questions, actively try to center discussion of those questions from the platforms of the large demonstrations. They succeeded pretty well in doing that in Tel Aviv, much less well in Haifa, Beersheba, and Jerusalem, where there was a little bit more of a broader coalition. But the main person who emerged during that period as the likely one to replace the Netanyahu as prime minister was Benny Gantz, former chief of staff at the time of Israel's war on the Gaza Strip in 2014, who is not on record as favoring ending the occupation, who is on record as favoring Israeli annexation of at least 20% of the West Bank, in addition to the 9 or 10% that is de facto annexed already. So it's going to be a while. I mean, if he does in fact become Netanyahu's successor, if you were a bettor, that's who I'd advise betting on. I'm not a bettor. So if he does succeed Netanyahu, we will have a situation of status quo ante minus the particularly vicious bullying of Netanyahu and his personal corruption. He's on trial for 3 different corruption charges right now. And that won't be a great advance over what there was before October 7th. Longer term, things can move, things can change.
Thank you, Joel. We have Hank Robb from the Zoom audience. Hank, can you come in, please?
My sympathy with the members of your family. May they be returned soon. Second, thank you for your very clear presentation. My question is, given the criteria that you set forward for the position that you would like to make sure is known to exist, do you think it is more likely to happen if there are 2 states or 1 from the river to the sea?
Everybody asks that question and I don't answer it. I don't answer it for several reasons. One, nobody's talking about that now. I mean, the whole point of Netanyahu's strategy, and which was successful, and before him, Ariel Sharon's strategy, was to prevent the discussion of a Palestinian state. And in the interim, there are now 750,000 Jewish settlers in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. So the question of where a Palestinian state alongside Israel would even fit is complicated. But I'm also not a party to that discussion. That's a discussion between Israelis and Palestinians if they ever get down to it. And finally, I don't think states are the solutions here. States are the problem. So I'd much rather put my energy into promoting projects that encourage coexistence, Jews learning Arabic, joint institutions of various sorts, things like the hand-in-hand network of binational, bicultural schools, the Oasis of Peace, binational community between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, and a number of other small, to be sure, projects of that sort, because those are the things that are the model for the future. So this is very idealistic and long range and unpragmatic, but I don't think it's any less likely than the establishment of 1 or 2 states in the foreseeable future. So I might as well put my energy in what I believe in.
Thank you.
Thank you again for your clarity.
Thank you. We have question number 3 would be next. Come on in, Joyce.
My question, you may have hinted at this, I'm not sure, but has there ever been among the occupants of Israel, and I don't know if they're all Jewish, but I assume they are.
No, they're not.
Oh, okay. That's what I'm leaning toward is, has there ever been an appreciable group of people, I might call them a left wing, I don't know, who empathized with the people in Gaza? And if so, did the events of October 7th kill that, or at least deter it somewhat? I don't know the word I'm trying to use, make it smaller.
Yes, there was historically an Israeli peace movement that embraced the 2-state solution. It died with the Second Intifada and its suicide bombings. But even more than because of the violence of the suicide bombings, because Israel proclaimed that it had offered the Palestinians everything at the August 2000 Camp David summit, where President Clinton, Yasser Arafat and Ehud Barak, Prime Minister of Israel, met, and the Arafat turned it down and turned to violence. Now, that story is totally false. It will take me a long time to construct an alternative to it, but that's the story that Israelis believe, and that is what allowed the Sharon Netanyahu strategy of not dealing with the Palestinians and not dealing with the possibility of a Palestinian state to emerge. Nonetheless, a much smaller, constrained Israeli, well, in Israel, they're called left because being in favor of peace is called left in Israel, so we can use that term, persisted. And in fact, most of the inhabitants of the kibbutzim and moshavim who were attacked on October 7th would have been counted as supporters of that movement. And among them were some very prominent peace activists. So Chaim Katzman, member of Kibbutz Cholit, who people in the United States know because he got his PhD in comparative religious studies at the University of Washington, Seattle. A couple of my friends were his advisors. He was killed on October 7th. Vivian Silver, who was very prominent, one of the founders of Women in Black, which is a feminist anti-occupation movement, and who used to every Saturday meet Palestinians at the Erez Crossing who were allowed to cross into Israel to receive medical care, or she would drive them to the hospital. She was killed on October 7th. So because of the enormity of the massacre of non-combatants, and B, in particular, the fact that several very prominent leaders in the movement against Israel's occupation were killed by Hamas on October 7th. This is going to be an enormous setback to that kind of politics. On the other hand, several of my friends have noted that while genocidal thinking has become widespread in Israel from the top down, I quoted Prime Minister Netanyahu's statement, and there were others on that slide from other prominent people, and the Israeli media, especially the TV, even the public TV. I can't even bring myself to watch the TV channels of the right wing, but the public TV, which is liberal, it's hysterical. In all of that, my Israeli and Palestinian friends have told me that people who know Palestinians, not just in passing as the waiter in a restaurant or a cashier in a store, but people who actually work with Palestinians are more than ever committed to the idea of a shared society. And even though I don't live there, haven't lived there since 1973, although spent many months at a time there since then on more than a few occasions, I know that that's true because among my recent PhD students are two Palestinian citizens of Israel, both from Nazareth. So remember, 21% of all of Israel's citizens are Palestinians. And right after October 7th, because they know the geography and they know where my family is, they got in touch with me, and they are in regular touch with me since October 7th. So I know that our relationship remains strong. It has not been shaken. I would, if I were to live in that land between the river and the sea, I would want them as my next door neighbors. And that's a feeling that for me has not changed one iota.
Our next here at Friendly House, speaker number 5. So good to see you here, Todd.
Thank you for your presentation today, and I'm sorry for what you're going through personally. I want to ask a question about something you said at the very end of your presentation. You said that you didn't believe that we could learn things from history. That's not a common belief in society or something that's commonly said. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Sure. That was a bit telegraphic, and this is the problem. History is not a simple single thing consisting of a set of facts and documented events that happen one after the other. What historians do is argue about what those facts mean, what's the appropriate context for interpreting those facts. I mean, that's a little bit of what I tried to do in this talk, right? To show you that Hamas would see it this way, the Israelis see it that way. So if history is necessarily multivocal, that there's going to be this discussion. I mean, this is what I did for 35 years at Stanford. Didn't get up there and say, okay, this happened and this happened and this happened, and now you remember that, and you come back and you write on your exam. I didn't even give any exams. What I just said there, or what you read in the book about that. The mode of discussion is, tell me why you think this interpretation is better than that interpretation, and what evidence supports this interpretation, and what evidence supports that interpretation, and why do you think this evidence is stronger than that evidence, and what about interpretations that aren't ones that we read about in class, since you can't read all of them? What's missing from the 2 or 3 that we have read? So if that's what studying history is, it's a lot harder to say, oh, well, this happened in Vietnam, and that means this is going to happen in Iraq. All the people who thought that were wrong. And the cost of their being wrong was hundreds of thousands of civilians killed. So I would say the same thing. The Israelis who believe that their army, which has performed terribly by historical standards, if Israelis believe that their army is the proper instrument to eliminate Hamas's claims against Israel, will be successful, I think that's wrong. But then the vast majority of Israeli Jews disagree with me. So let's understand why they think what they think and why I think what I think. And I mean, a Palestinian would say something else, perhaps. Let's hear what that person thinks. So not easy to say, oh, these things happened and therefore.
I understand that there are more Christian Zionists than there are Jews in the world. Yeah. And I wonder whether or not that's true. I do wonder if that might have something to do with political expediency as far as our country stand on a two-state solution or two-state situation.
Mm-hmm. So Jews are about let's talk about the United States, not the world. Jews are about 2.4% of the American population. So that's in the range of 5-6 million-ish. Christians United for Israel, which is the biggest evangelical Protestant organization led by Reverend John Hagee, claims 10 million members. Christians United for Israel is effectively the social base of the Republican Party. So they have a great deal to do with how our political system views this question. Their view, that is those evangelical Christians, is called theologically premillennial dispensationalism. They believe that the establishment of the state of Israel is a sign that the kingdom of David will soon be reestablished. They are in sync with the Jewish messianist quasi-fascists in that regard. And then there will be Battle of Armageddon, and Jews will either have to convert or die. There, that's a divergence between the two on that point. But then, those guys think those guys are totally wrong, and those guys think those guys are totally wrong. But it's an alliance of convenience as far as it goes. Yeah, that explains a lot of the politics, because of course the American Jewish community is overwhelmingly supports the Democratic Party. I think 78%, 76%, some number like that, voted Democratic in the last presidential election cycle. Maybe even more will, because Biden has been so supportive of Israel. Maybe fewer, because Trump will try to say that he's even more supportive of Israel, even though he's an anti-Semite. So this is the American political dynamic. Our political discourse is infantile because we're not able to talk about things in an open way, because as soon as you say anything, you're an anti-Semite. So noting, for example, that in a typical presidential election cycle, Jews may donate as much as 50% of all the funds raised by Democratic Party PACs. So I don't say that that's an absolute fact. It's very hard to determine that with precision, but it's roughly the case. But I've been called an anti-Semite for saying that. I mean, it either is or isn't true, but I don't see that you could be called an anti-Semite reasonably, but one is. Mearsheimer and Walt, who wrote a book about that sort of thing, were called anti-Semites because they wrote about the Israel lobby. So we can't have an intelligent discussion when the media agree to frame things in those ways.
Thank you, Joel.
Is there some security blanket or something that causes the Israeli leadership to seem to want to prolong a situation where they're surrounded by hostile people? I'm thinking maybe it could be the alliance with the United States, maybe it could be their nuclear weapons, maybe it could be their army. I'm not sure. And is there something that if you took it away, Israel might be more inclined to follow a course of coexistence, and same for the other side too?
So yes, the security blanket for Israel is first and foremost the United States, and Israel would not be able to do nearly as easily what it has done in Gaza since October 7th, or more broadly with regard to the Palestinian people since 1948, if the United States had not either passively or actively, these days much more actively, supported that. The United States gives Israel $3.8 billion a year in military aid. We should be clear on what that means. That means American taxpayers give the American arms industry $3.8 billion a year so that Israel can get those weapons from Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, et cetera, et cetera. So the arms industry is the silent partner in the Israel lobby in American politics. So if that were ended, it would have a very substantial impact on what Israel would do. Israel has 200 nuclear weapons, which is a violation, and Israel is not a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. If the United States would talk about the fact that the only nuclear armed nation in the Middle East is in fact Israel, and this might have something to do with the aspirations of Iran to become capable of making a nuclear weapon, which it, by all accounts, doesn't have yet, that would make a big difference. If the United States were to implement the Leahy amendments, which were passed in the early 2000s, and which prohibit giving military aid to countries which are systematic violators of human rights. That would make a big difference. If the United States would stop vetoing resolutions in the Security Council that condemn Israel for various violations of human rights. The United States vetoed 2 resolutions in the Security Council, I think, since October 7th. The Security Council resolutions in and of themselves don't matter a great deal, but they're could be part of an international climate of censure against Israel for its treatment of the Palestinians. We need to be clear that there are not here 2 equal parties in a conflict. Israel, despite its not so wonderful performance since October 7th, has the most powerful armed force between Morocco and Pakistan. It's got F-16s, F-35s, Abrams tanks, local Israeli versions of Abrams tanks, armed personnel carriers, massive surveillance apparatus, a standing army of 110,000, 360,000 reserves mobilized. Hamas has 35,000 militia fighters with guns, with rifles, and rockets that it has learned to manufacture. This is not an equal fight of any sort. So Hamas could be restrained if Israel would lift the siege on the Gaza Strip, allow humanitarian aid in, give people a perspective other than the inhumane one that Hamas proposes. If they had a political, economic perspective, if young people thought that they could get a job somewhere, that's what needs to be done to weaken Hamas's support among the Palestinian people. So very different sorts of things need to happen with each of the parties.
Thank you. Will Singer is got his hand up and wanted to ask a question. Will?
Thanks very much. Joel, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about another time when Palestinian leadership was under siege by the Israeli military, that the goal was to wipe out, in that case, the PLO in Beirut. And if you'd talk maybe a little bit about that history and perhaps some insights that history might have bearing on the current crisis.
I think you tuned in late because I did talk about it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And I went on to argue that it's not so easy to draw lessons from history, even though the one lesson that I would draw from that experience is that a political ideology can't be eliminated by military force, and that didn't happen in 1982, and it likely won't happen now.
We have time for one short question. Number 8, could you come to the mic quickly and just a question?
Well, to show my a simplified version of my bias is how much does religion have to take the blame on a lot of this?
So originally, not so much. The Zionist movement was a rebellion against Jewish religious tradition. That is why most Orthodox rabbis opposed Zionism. It's why Reform Jews opposed Zionism until the Holocaust. And then Orthodox Jews and Reform Jews changed their view and said, well, okay, Jews were murdered. The West allowed that to happen. Jews need a refuge. Okay, Jewish state. On the Palestinian side, also, this was never primarily a religious question. First of all, there are Christian Palestinians, but the effective leader of the Palestinian national movement from the late 1920s until 1948 in some ways, but much less so after 1939, was Al-Hajj Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, a position that didn't exist before Britain received the mandate over Palestine, essentially a modern form of colony, and created that position with the idea that if Palestinians are categorized religiously, they'll be split apart, and that will help us manage the situation. Classic British imperial divide and rule. They had done the same thing in India, and many of the same people were administering Palestine who had administered India previously. So, or Egypt, where they did similar kinds of things. So there were and are two nationalist movements here. Nationalism is a secular ideology, but many nationalist movements, including American nationalist movements, mobilize religion for their purposes. So a lot of the clashes historically happened around the Temple Mount, Haram al-Sharif, where the Muslim holy places, that's the third holiest place in Islam, the holiest place in the Jewish tradition. So lots of tension around that area. But the actual construction of the Zionist settler project took place on the rural frontier and in Tel Aviv, which became effectively the capital of Zionism well before the establishment of the State of Israel. So originally you had a clash between a settler colonial national movement and national movement of the indigenous people of Palestine. And over time, religious elements were mobilized on both sides. And eventually, after 1967, those religious elements became strengthened. So on the Jewish side, Rabbi Cook gave a sermon 2 weeks before the 1967 war, in which he bemoaned that the United Nations partition plan and even the expanded version of the State of Israel that came into being as a result of the 1948 war, which was larger than what the partition plan envisioned, did not include Jericho, Nablus, Shechem, it's called in Hebrew, East Jerusalem, and the East Bank. So his vision of where the land of Israel is goes actually river to the sea, but he means the Tigris-Euphrates River to the Egyptian Sea, the Nile River. Well, okay, 67 war happens, and boom, Israel has conquered a whole bunch of that stuff. So he became a prophet, and that strengthened that strain of religio-nationalist messianism, which is represented today in the Israeli government by two important ministers. On the Palestinian side, so in the 1970s, there's broad, in response to the Palestinian defeat, the defeat of secular pan-Arab nationalism and Arab socialism with the defeat of Egypt and Syria by Israel. Jordan was also defeated, but Jordan was never on for those ideological orientations. With that defeat, Islamic movements gained popularity, including in Palestine, and then eventually become formulated in Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. So the religionization of the conflict is relatively recently, if you understand the conflict, to have begun in the late 19th century. You can read a good book about that. On one side, the religionization of Israel by Yoav Peled. It's an academic book, a little bit heavy duty perhaps. And then I already mentioned Tarek Bakoni's book, Hamas, contained as a way to understand what Hamas is about.
I wish the best for your family. That you were able to speak so fluently and so portraying both sides, even though you have strong feelings, of course, because of your family. I just want to sincerely thank you. This was a real learning experience for all of us.
Thank you.
And much appreciated.
Thank you.